Imagine this for a moment. While the world keeps its eyes fixed on Silicon Valley, quietly, something extraordinary is unfolding elsewhere. A shift so powerful that it has the potential to rewrite the future of technology, business, and global influence. The story isn't about those who already have power. It's about those who are rising, those who are underestimated, and those who are building strength when no one is paying attention. India just became that secret power move, not in the loud, flashy way the West likes to announce breakthroughs, but in a way that feels inevitable, unstoppable, and deeply human. Think about it. Hundreds of millions of young, ambitious minds who are not waiting for someone else to hand them an opportunity. They are creating opportunities. They are coding, innovating, solving problems that the world doesn't even see yet. And companies like Nvidia know it. They see where the energy is, where the hunger is, where the future lives. This is more than business. This is about resilience, about a nation that has been told for decades that it was only a market, never a leader. And yet today, it's positioning itself not just to participate in the global tech revolution, but to drive it. That's not just strategy, that's destiny. And here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Real power doesn't come from where you are, it comes from how much you're willing to push when no one believes in you. India's rise is proof of that. The late nights, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the refusal to quit even when infrastructure, systems, or society made it harder. That spirit is what turns underdogs into world leaders. If you're listening right now, let this sink in. The same story unfolding on a global scale can unfold in your own life. You don't need permission from the world. You don't need validation from those who already sit on top. What you need is hunger, focus, and the courage to play the long game. Because when the world finally notices, it will look like an overnight success. But those who've lived it will know it wasn't overnight. It was built day by day, in silence, with patience, with sweat, with sacrifice. So remember this. The future doesn't belong to the ones who already hold the spotlight. The future belongs to those who are bold enough to believe that they can shape it. And when you commit to that belief, when you work for it with everything you have, you become the secret power move that nobody saw coming until it's too late to ignore. The very first step of learning, whether for an individual or for a nation, is awareness. Before change can ever happen, there has to be a moment when you suddenly realize that the world you thought you knew is only part of the picture. And right now, the world is beginning to wake up to something that has been quietly building for years, a silent revolution, a shift that is not happening loudly in Silicon Valley, but quietly in India. Why is this the first step? Because learning always begins with seeing what others fail to notice. Think of your own life. The moment you realize you are capable of more than the limitations people put on you, that's the moment growth starts. For India, that awareness is no longer about being a follower in technology, but about becoming a driver of it. For decades, the narrative was simple. Innovation happens in the West, execution happens in the East. But silently, without the spotlight, India has been rewriting that script. This isn't just about cheap labor or outsourcing anymore. It's about a generation of people hungry to solve problems at scale, problems that the rest of the world either ignores or doesn't understand. It's about engineers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers building solutions not just for the elite few, but for billions. And in that process, they're building something much bigger than the world expected. This is why awareness is the first step of learning. You begin to see that power is not fixed. It shifts, it evolves, and it moves to where the energy is. Companies like Nvidia have already understood this. They don't make secret moves without reason. They know where the future will be built. They see the data, they see the talent, they see the hunger, and they know it can't be ignored. While many in the West still hold on to the illusion that Silicon Valley is the only place that matters, the truth is unfolding differently. Now think about your own journey for a moment. How many times have you underestimated yourself because the world made you believe you didn't belong in the race? Maybe you told yourself success only belongs to those born in privilege, in the right place, or with the right resources. But the very first step to break free is realizing that this belief is a lie. The same way India is stepping into awareness of its hidden power, you too must step into the awareness of your own. A silent revolution doesn't begin with noise, it begins with mindset. When you quietly decide you won't stay in the shadow of others anymore, when you recognize that your potential has been underestimated, that's when the shift starts. And in that sense, India's story is not just about technology or business, it's about a mindset that every individual can relate to. Look deeper into what's happening. India is not just providing workers for global companies, it's becoming the breeding ground for innovation, research, and advanced technology development. Artificial intelligence, chip design, cloud infrastructure, deep learning, all of these fields are being fueled by Indian minds who were once dismissed as support but are now shaping the direction of global technology. That's the kind of awareness that transforms not only how the world sees you but how you see yourself. The silent revolution is a reminder: never mistake quietness for weakness. The quiet phase is the learning phase. The quiet phase is where roots are growing, even when nothing seems to be visible on the surface. And just like India has been quietly preparing for this moment, so too must you prepare in silence before your breakthrough comes. Remember, the first step of learning is not about making noise. It's not about showing the world what you can do. It's about recognizing for yourself what you are capable of and building in silence until the world can no longer deny it. That's exactly what India represents right now. A force that was once underestimated, now quietly becoming impossible to ignore. So, when we talk about a silent revolution, we're not just talking about a country's rise. We're talking about the first step every learner, every dreamer, every underdog must take: the step of awareness. Once you see what's possible, once you recognize that the old rules no longer define you, the journey truly begins. And just like India, once you awaken to that truth, the world will eventually have no choice but to see it too. The first step of learning is energy. The kind of energy that refuses to sit still, the kind of energy that refuses to wait for permission. When you look at what's happening right now, you realize this isn't just about technology or companies making bold moves. It's about the unstoppable force of human ambition, and nowhere is that energy more alive than in India. Think about it. Millions of young people, fueled not by privilege, but by hunger. They don't sit around waiting for the perfect opportunity, because they know that opportunity isn't handed to them, it's created. This is the first step of real learning, when you stop waiting for someone else to tell you it's your time and you decide to make it your time. That is the unstoppable energy that's transforming not just individual lives, but an entire nation. When a student in a small town stays up all night teaching themselves to code, even though their internet connection drops every other minute, that's energy. When a young entrepreneur decides to pitch their startup idea, even though everyone around them tells them it's impossible, that's energy. When families sacrifice comfort so the next generation can get educated, that's energy. And it is this collective, unstoppable force that companies like Nvidia recognize. They see that the future won't be written by the comfortable, but by the restless. Energy is what separates the dreamers from the doers. It's what pushes someone to go beyond the expectations society places on them. For years, India was seen as a country of workers, supporting, assisting, following instructions. But now, with this energy rising, the narrative is changing. The first step of learning here is not about memorizing facts or copying formulas. It's about learning to channel that energy into creation, into problem solving, into innovation. And here's the part most people overlook. Energy is contagious. When one person refuses to give up, it lights a fire in others. You've seen it in your own life. Maybe you had a friend, a mentor, or even a stranger who inspired you simply by the way they kept going, no matter how tough it got. Their energy became fuel for you. That's exactly what's happening on a massive scale right now. One young innovator inspires another, one breakthrough leads to 10 more, and suddenly, an unstoppable movement is born. The first step of learning is realizing that energy doesn't depend on resources. It depends on mindset. You don't need the best equipment, the perfect environment, or the smoothest path. What you need is the fire inside that says, I will not stop until I figure this out. That's why even with obstacles, power cuts, limited funding, outdated infrastructure, this generation of innovators keeps going. Their energy is bigger than the barriers. Let's bring it closer to you. In your own life, how many times have you said, I don't have enough time, enough money, enough connections. Those are real challenges, yes, but they are not the deciding factor. The deciding factor is whether you have the energy to push past them. When you study after a long, exhausting day because you know your future depends on it, that's energy. When you wake up before everyone else because you refuse to waste another day, that's energy. The first step of learning is not about having the answers, it's about having the drive to keep searching until you find them. That's why this unstoppable energy is so powerful. It doesn't just change the individual, it changes the game. It forces the world to pay attention. It makes even the most powerful companies rethink their strategies. Why? Because they know that no amount of money or influence can compete with the raw determination of millions of people who refuse to stop moving forward. And here's the truth. The world rarely rewards silence or hesitation. It rewards energy, momentum, persistence. The ones who rise are not always the most talented, but the ones who refuse to stay still. The first step of learning is to realize that knowledge doesn't come to those who sit and wait. It comes to those who chase it down with relentless energy. So when we talk about India becoming a secret power move, it's not just about politics or economics. It's about people who embody this unstoppable energy, the energy to learn without resources, to innovate without recognition, to dream without limits. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it impossible to ignore. And in your own journey, if you truly want to grow, if you truly want to rise, you have to start here. Step 1, energy, unstoppable, unshakable, undeniable energy. Because once that fire is lit, nothing, not doubt, not fear, not failure, can put it out. The first step of learning is resilience. Before knowledge turns into success, before effort transforms into achievement, there must be the ability to endure. Learning is never a straight line. It bends, it breaks, it tests you. And what decides whether you rise or stay down isn't brilliance or talent, but resilience. That is what defines destiny. When we look at India today, this truth becomes crystal clear. For years, the country has been underestimated, labeled as a follower, a market, a place to consume rather than create. The systems were imperfect, the challenges immense, lack of infrastructure, lack of recognition, lack of resources. But still, people kept moving. Students studied under dim light, coders worked with broken connections, entrepreneurs faced rejection after rejection, and yet they persisted. That's resilience, the first step of learning that transforms adversity into fuel. Think about your own journey. How many times have you been told, you can't do this, you're not good enough, you don't belong here, it's painful, it cuts deep. And many people stop right there. But resilience is about refusing to let those voices write your story. It's about standing up every single time you get knocked down. That's why resilience is not just survival, it's destiny in the making. Destiny is never given, it's earned. And the way it's earned is by pushing forward when everything tells you to stop. That is what India has done, step by step, year after year. The first step of learning for an individual or for a nation is not how fast you can run when the road is clear. It's whether you keep walking when the path is broken. That patience, that endurance, that ability to adapt and keep moving forward is what eventually turns weakness into strength. And here's the hidden truth. Resilience builds skills that comfort never will. When everything is easy, you learn nothing. But when you struggle, when you fall, when you fail, when you feel alone, that's when you learn how strong you really are. India's rise is not built on comfort. It is built on discomfort. It is built on decades of struggle, decades of being overlooked, decades of being underestimated. That's why its destiny is so powerful now, because resilience forged it. And the same applies to you. If your life has been difficult, if you've been told your dreams are too big, if you've faced setbacks that felt unbearable, understand this: that is not the end of your story. That is the first step of learning resilience. Every time you choose not to give up, you are shaping a destiny that others cannot see yet. Just like India, your breakthrough will look sudden to the outside world, but deep down you'll know it was built in silence, through years of resilience. Resilience also changes the way you see obstacles. What others see as walls, you begin to see as lessons. Every rejection becomes a redirection. Every failure becomes feedback. Every delay becomes preparation. That's the mindset that shifts destiny. Because the truth is, destiny is not waiting for you. It's being shaped by you, day after day, in how you respond to struggle. Look at the young innovators across India who have built companies, solutions, and technologies from scratch, often with nothing but persistence on their side. They didn't start with endless resources or global support. They started with resilience, the determination to keep going when results didn't show up immediately. That's the same resilience that will carry you when life seems impossible. The first step of learning is not about memorizing information. It's about training yourself to stay the course no matter how rough it gets. Because learning is not a straight path. It's a series of setbacks, trials, and breakthroughs. Those who endure, those who refuse to quit, are the ones who discover their true potential. So when we say resilience is destiny, it means this: the future doesn't belong to those who never fail. It belongs to those who never stay down. The story of India proves it. The story of every self-made success proves it. And your story can prove it too, if you are willing to embrace resilience as your first step of learning. The first step of learning is embracing the role of the underdog. Because when you are the underdog, when the world looks at you and says, you are not good enough, not strong enough, not prepared enough, that is when you discover the greatest advantage of all. Being underestimated gives you freedom. It gives you hunger. It gives you the drive to prove not just to others, but to yourself, that you are more than what they see. For too long, India was seen as an underdog in technology and innovation. The story was simple. The big breakthroughs happen elsewhere, and India's role is to support. That's how Silicon Valley thought. That's how the global market believed. But what people forget is that underdogs have the power of surprise. They're not watched as closely. They're not taken as seriously. And because of that, they have the freedom to build quietly, to fail without attention, to grow without pressure, until one day they emerge so strong that no one can ignore them anymore. This is the first step of learning. Never resent being underestimated. Never resent being the underdog. Instead, recognize it as your greatest chance to build in silence. Because when no one expects you to win, you are free to focus on growth, free to experiment, free to prepare. That's how destiny is shaped. Away from the spotlight, in the shadows of doubt, fueled by hunger. Think about your own life. Maybe people laughed at your dreams. Maybe they told you that you're not smart enough, not talented enough, not connected enough. And maybe, for a moment, you believed them. But here's the truth. The underdog position is not a curse. It's your advantage. Because when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to fight for. When you don't have the privilege of comfort, you build resilience, discipline, and creativity that those at the top will never know. That's what India represents today. For decades underestimated, for decades overlooked, and yet those very decades built the hunger, the resourcefulness, the relentless drive that is now becoming impossible to compete with. Companies like Nvidia see it. They recognize that true innovation doesn't just come from established leaders. It comes from the restless, the underestimated, the underdogs who refuse to stop pushing forward. And this is where the first step of learning becomes personal, because when you embrace being the underdog, you stop seeing rejection as failure. You start seeing it as fuel. Every no becomes motivation. Every doubt becomes energy. Every time someone says you can't, it plants a seed that says, watch me. That mindset is the most powerful lesson you can learn in life. Being underestimated doesn't weaken you, it strengthens you. Look at history. Every great breakthrough has come from people who were once dismissed, innovators who were told their ideas were foolish, dreamers who were laughed at for thinking differently, leaders who were told they didn't have what it takes. What they all had in common was the underdog advantage, the hunger to prove the world wrong. And here's the thing. When you're the underdog, you learn to work harder, you learn to fight smarter, you learn to endure longer. You don't have the luxury of shortcuts, so you build skills others never develop. You don't have the comfort of guaranteed success, so you learn to adapt in ways others can't. That's why underdogs, once they rise, often dominate, because their success isn't built on luck or privilege, but on raw persistence and grit. This is exactly what India has been doing. While the spotlight was elsewhere, while the headlines celebrated others, millions of people were quietly working, quietly learning, quietly building. The result? a force so powerful that it is now reshaping the balance of technology across the world. That's the power of the underdog advantage. And for you, this is the lesson. If you feel like the world doubts you, if you feel like you are starting from behind, don't see it as a setback. See it as the first step of learning. Learn to turn doubt into determination. Learn to turn rejection into redirection. Learn to turn invisibility into preparation. Because when the time comes, when you finally rise, you won't just succeed, you'll shock the world. That's the beauty of the underdog. The victory is always sweeter because nobody saw it coming, and the journey is always deeper because it was built with sweat, with sacrifice, with hunger. Being underestimated doesn't mean you are weak. It means you are being given the chance to grow stronger than anyone can imagine. The first step of learning is reflection. Because no matter how inspiring a story might sound on the outside, it only becomes real when you connect it back to your own life. You can hear about nations rising, companies making bold moves, and revolutions happening in silence. But unless you see how that same truth applies to you, the lesson is wasted. When we look at what's happening right now, the rise of India, the recognition from companies like Nvidia, the quiet transformation of an underdog into a leader, it isn't just about technology or geopolitics. It's a mirror reflecting what is possible for every single person who has ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or left behind. Because just like India, your story is not defined by where you start. It's defined by how far you're willing to go. The first step of learning then is to recognize that the same forces shaping a nation's destiny are at work in your own journey. What do I mean by that? Think about it. Resilience, hunger, patience, the willingness to work in silence while nobody notices. These aren't just qualities of countries, they are qualities of people. And just like India had to push through decades of doubt to step into its power, you too must push through the doubts of others, and more importantly, the doubts inside yourself. Reflection is powerful because it forces you to stop and ask, where am I underestimating myself? Where am I waiting for permission instead of creating my own opportunity? Where am I letting rejection define me instead of using it to fuel me? These are not small questions. They are the beginning of transformation. Because once you reflect honestly, you can no longer pretend you are powerless. You begin to see that the underdog story unfolding in the world is the same story waiting to unfold within you. Let's bring it closer. India's journey wasn't overnight. For decades, the world only saw it as a follower. Isn't that how people often see you? Isn't that how you sometimes see yourself? You feel like you're always one step behind, always catching up, never the one in control. But here's the first step of learning: to realize that every setback, every delay, every unnoticed effort is not wasted, it is preparation. Silent preparation for a breakthrough that will seem sudden to everyone else, but that you will know was years in the making. Reflection teaches you patience. When you see how long it took for a nation to shift from being underestimated to becoming a leader, you begin to understand that your own growth will take time too. And that's okay. Too many people quit because they expect success to be instant. They expect their effort to show results immediately. But just like India's rise, your rise will look invisible until suddenly it's undeniable. That's the power of reflection. It reminds you that your timeline doesn't have to match anyone else's. And reflection also teaches gratitude. When you see how others have struggled, how they've been dismissed, how they've fought to climb their way forward, you realize that your struggles are not meaningless. They are shaping you. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every small step forward is a piece of your own silent revolution. The first step of learning, then, is to stop comparing your story to someone else's highlight reel and instead reflect on the truth of your own journey. Because when you do, you begin to see the same unstoppable energy, the same resilience, the same underdog advantage alive in you. It may not look like much now, but neither did India decades ago. And look at where it is heading today. So ask yourself, what part of your life right now feels like the silent revolution nobody notices? What part of you is growing in the shadows, waiting for its time to rise? What skills are you building quietly? What dreams are you nurturing silently? What sacrifices are you making that the world doesn't see? Reflection is the first step of learning to honor those invisible efforts, to recognize that just because the world isn't clapping yet doesn't mean the work isn't valuable. Because here's the truth: the moment you reflect deeply enough, you stop waiting for recognition. You stop craving validation. You stop looking for shortcuts. Instead, you embrace the process. You embrace the struggle. You embrace the silence. And that is when your life begins to mirror the same transformation we're seeing on a global scale. An underdog story turning into a destiny no one can deny. The first step of learning is courage. Before skills, before knowledge, before recognition, there has to be a decision to be bold enough to take the first step, even when you don't know the outcome. And when we look at the world right now, when we see India stepping into a role the world never expected, we see this truth. The future does not belong to those who sit comfortably in the spotlight. It belongs to those bold enough to believe they can create it. Being bold doesn't mean you have all the answers. It doesn't mean you're fearless. It simply means you are willing to move forward despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite the doubt. That is the first step of learning. You learn not by waiting until you're ready, but by daring to step in when you're not. That's what courage is. That's what boldness is. And that's why the future bends toward those who embrace it. Look at what's happening right now. For years, the narrative was simple. The world's biggest innovations would always come from the same places, the same names, the same circles. But then something shifted. Quietly, India began to move. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but with boldness. Millions of young people choosing to dream bigger than the limits placed on them. Engineers daring to compete globally. Entrepreneurs daring to launch startups no one thought could survive. A nation daring to believe it could be more than just a participant, that it could be a leader. That's the first step of learning, boldness. The willingness to say, I belong in this race. I have the right to dream big. I have the right to try, even if I fail. Without that step, nothing else follows. Without boldness, there is no resilience, no innovation, no revolution. Boldness is the spark. Now think about your own life. How many times have you held back because you were afraid you weren't ready? How many times did you stop yourself because you thought others were smarter, richer, more talented, more connected? How many opportunities slipped through your hands because you chose comfort over courage? And yet, deep down, you know the truth. The moments that shaped you the most were not the ones where you played safe. They were the ones where you dared to take a risk. Being bold doesn't mean being reckless. It means believing enough in your vision to take the first step, even when the road isn't clear. It means daring to learn in the open, daring to fail in front of others, daring to push when everyone else is holding back. That's why boldness is the first step of learning. You cannot grow if you never start, and you cannot start if you are too afraid of what might go wrong. The world rewards boldness because boldness creates momentum. The companies shaping the future didn't start with certainty, they started with courage. The individuals changing their lives didn't begin with a guarantee, they began with a decision to move. And nations, like India, don't rise by waiting for approval. They rise by daring to believe in themselves when no one else does. Here's the secret: the future is always uncertain. It always feels risky. That's why so many people stay behind. They wait for guarantees that never come. But the bold understand that uncertainty is part of the process. They step into the unknown, and that act of courage itself creates opportunities that would never have existed otherwise. Think about it. The silent revolution we've been talking about, the energy, the resilience, the underdog advantage, it all begins with boldness. Someone has to take that first step. Someone has to say, I will not wait for permission. I will not wait for perfect conditions. I will move now. That is how change begins. That is how the future is claimed. And when you choose boldness, something incredible happens. You stop living in reaction to the world and you start shaping it. You stop waiting for doors to open and you start building your own. You stop seeing yourself as small and you start realizing that every great leader, every innovator, every nation that rose from nothing began exactly where you are now, with a single act of courage. So the first step of learning is this: be bold. Believe that your future is not defined by where you started, but by how brave you are willing to be today. Because just like India's rise, your rise will not come from playing safe. It will come from daring to dream when no one believes in you, daring to try when no one expects you to win, daring to move when everyone else stands still. And in that boldness, you claim not just your future, you claim the right to shape the world itself. And now, after everything we've seen, after every lesson hidden inside this story, let me leave you with this truth. Your life, just like the rise we've been talking about, is a silent revolution in the making. The world may not see you yet. They may underestimate you, overlook you, or dismiss you. But remember, energy, resilience, hunger, boldness, these are not qualities reserved for nations or companies. They are inside you, right now. One day, your persistence will look like destiny. One day, your sacrifices will look like strategy. One day, your silent work will roar so loudly that the world will have no choice but to listen. The future doesn't belong to the ones who sit back and wait. The future belongs to the bold, to the relentless, to those who dare to rise when no one believes they can. So step forward. Take the first step of learning. Claim your place. Because the truth is this: you are the secret power move the world hasn't seen yet.